Is it just me, or does history feel like it's repeating itself? What was once this epidemic of cigarette addiction has been replaced by geek bars or flume bars, or how toxic body standards of the 90s promoting fad diets and supplements that didn't actually work has now been replaced by wellness, 75 hard, or why you need to drink bone broth every morning, or why this type of sea moss is the best for your smoothie, instead of actually just developing a consistent and sustainable healthy lifestyle. Or this glamorization of club culture like we saw in Studio 54 in the 80s, dancing away the trauma of this declining political system when we are now in a declining political system and just had something like Brat Summer glamorizing that club culture. What was once tabloid magazines tearing apart young girls like Britney Spears has now become tea channels and Dumois, or how mall culture fast fashion has been replaced by this rapid online trend cycles of Temu core fashion, which is now just ordering fast fashion online. The list goes on and on. It seems like every time we take one step forward, we somehow take two steps back as a society. It has created this epidemic of escapism. When we live in a world that feels like it's constantly falling apart around us, we have developed this mindset of, fuck it, we're all gonna die anyways, so I might as well just go and contribute to that behavior that is destroying the exact same element of society that is making me feel this way in the first place. We have become trapped in this loop of that escapism. Our reality sucks, so we go out and do some sort of behavior to get this feeling of instant gratification, which then doesn't solve the problem in the first place and pushes us deeper into the same hole that we are desperate to get out of. And when I see this sort of consumer behavior and psychological behavior happening across verticals from fashion to entertainment, politics, music, sports, everything, it has to be for some reason. It has to be for some greater sociological or psychological way we are all responding to the world around us. So how did we enter this epidemic of escapism? Why can we not only focus on improving our lives, but instead seeking out these tiny little things to make ourselves feel better? Well, that is exactly the question we set out to solve here today. Welcome back to Nicky at Night. I am your host, Nicky Reardon, and I'm very interested to talk about this epidemic of escapism. This is one of the video topics that has been in my notes for a while. Really, it started when I went home. When I went home for Christmas at the end of December. I think it's also interesting when you have these sort of like social interactions with friends who you really only see in these like regimented schedules, right? So like I only go home for Christmas once a year. So this group of friends that I have at home, I only see once a year. So it feels like every year I see this progression of this same group of people. And what was so fascinating to me was how they were all so addicted to some new concept of escapism, and how much that tiny little thing has now, that I had never mentioned before, like a new hobby or whatever, has now completely infiltrated their lives. And how so many friends around me I see are integrating themselves into these little things, like collecting Sony Angels, or getting into sports gambling, or picking up a nicotine addiction, or, you know, them talking about how the world sucks so bad and they feel like they can never have kids, but just adopted a third cat. You know, like, it is so interesting to me how we supplement these feelings that we feel based on this world and this, you know, existential doom. I think that we somehow all feel to some degree of severity in our lives with these things that are of the same category, but then only push us further into that hole, instead of actually like trying to diagnose the problem and having some like deeper level of introspection as to like, what do we want to do and how do we want to go from here? So that is really what I'm going to talk about today. Again, like, I think what's so interesting about when I see a trend like this, I don't just enjoy talking about like what a trend is. I think what's fascinating is why they happen, right? If something is happening to millions of people of multiple age groups across countries and continents around the world in all these random little subject matters, it is not a coincidence. It has to be some greater sort of psychological or sociological issue. And that to me is like what is interesting in studying a trend. I think just a trend itself is not valuable. Anybody can copy it, anybody can repeat it, and by the time you plan to do something on it, it'll be gone and replaced with something else tomorrow, right? But why they happen, this greater societal issue, systemic issue, is here to stay. And I think once you diagnose that societal or psychological behavior, you then see, again, how this element affects multiple things, as I'll talk about with literally, I have examples from like sports, fashion, entertainment, music, politics, All of these things that I find very, very fascinating right now, how we have so resorted to this concept of escapism instead of solving the problem in our life. So with that, don't forget to subscribe to the channel. We are on the road to 100K, people. I'm so, so excited. I think we just hit 70K today, the day I'm filming this. So, hey, thank y'all. Love y'all. And let's dive in. So starting with that, how do you define escapism? Well, escapism is, quote, the tendency to seek distraction or relief from unpleasant realities, especially by seeking entertainment or engaging in fantasy. And one, I think entertainment, the word entertainment is such a fascinating concept because really something you'll see, and I talk about later on, is how when there is like greater political turmoil or just like world stress, anxiety, you see this like rise of entertainment, you know, like it's interesting to me that again, as like I think we all feel this very unstable world around us politically, socioeconomically, the cost of living, whatever. We just had like one of the best years of music we've ever had. Everybody's like, wow, this is one of the best Grammys we've ever had. You know what I mean? Or even film, like all of these artistic mediums, the pendulum swings in the opposite direction of like art and society, which I think is very, very interesting to observe. But why do I think we have resorted to this epidemic of escapism? Like, why are people unable to look inwards towards solving these greater problems, and why are they resorting to these quick, cheap things? Number one, I think we are in a cost of living crisis. It is just affording any sort of large thing, even affording to live. It has never been more expensive to live as an American citizen than it is now, right? Just the median prices of rent in the United States have increased by 40% in 4 years, just rent prices. Grocery prices have seen a roughly 25% increase since 2020. Approximately 49% of all adults are in credit card debt. We have also seen prescription drug prices go up, gas prices go up, electricity and power go up. Like quite literally, statistically, mathematically, by every metric, it has never been more expensive to simply live. It has never been more expensive to simply meet your basic needs of food, water, shelter, housing, clothes, all of these things. It has never been more expensive when you like adjust for inflation and adjust for all of these things, which I find so fascinating. Again, it's which we'll get to this greater issue, I think, is that when things weren't that far away, so like we'll talk about this with owning a home, right? I think this is a massive idea of like owning a home from anyone in my generation feels like impossible right now, right? Like it's so, the way home prices have increased is insane. Like even where I am from in suburban Virginia, random place, like again, like not some major city or anything, is like the average price. I think my mom told me that like when she was able to like get a loan for a house, it was like $200,000. And now house in the area she lives in goes for over $1 million, right? Like it is insane the way housing prices have blown up. So because of that, again, looking at like the average price of a home in 1980 was $62,000. If you adjust that number for inflation to today, the same dollar amounts would be $252,000, right? That would be the average price of a home if you adjust it for inflation. However, according to statistics in 2025, the average home price is $420,000, right? So like, even if you adjust for inflation, the price of a house, for example, has nearly doubled, just simply doubled, right? To even be able to afford a home. Not to mention that all other cost of living expenses has also gone up, right? Groceries are more expensive. The rent you pay in your current place before you buy a home, more expensive. Electricity, people are in credit card debt, like all of these things are siphoning away from this ability for a person to have like disposable income, right? So once upon a time, again, when a home is like roughly, you know, $62,000 or $252,000 adjusted to today, the idea of saving for a down payment was like $20,000, $10,000, right? That's what a down payment on a home would have been. And although that is a lot of money, that is like an attainable goal, right? Like I do think that like a lot of people out there, if they really, really tried, and if you have a stable job, like could through years save that amount of money, right? If you adjust that to today, that is like 50,000 to 100,000. When already 49% of all adults are in credit card debt. Like they're not even able to pay off their own credit card. So when the goal feels so much further away, people don't even feel the need to chase the goal to begin with. I think that is like this greater overarching thesis, right? Like, and that's also, I think, where this really weird generational gap about this issue of living stems from. You know, like when you talk to your parents or grandparents, they're like, oh, well, when I was your age, I just saved, 5 to 10% from every paycheck. And in 5 years, I was able to afford a house and I got my down payment and blah, blah, blah. And I've had this house for 20 years. And what they don't understand is that that is literally not possible, right? Like any of us could save 5 to 10% of our paycheck for X amount of years and then the same amount of years, and we would not be able to buy the same home, right? They have this misrepresentation in their mind that like, because I did these inputs, if you also do these inputs today, you can get the same outputs that I got. And that is just simply not true. It is simply not true. Like, it's just not the way our economy and society has developed. So because of this idea of like, well, I can't pursue some greater goal in years, right? Like, there's no reason for you to be like, okay, like let me try not to spend $6 on a cup of coffee every day, blah, blah, blah. Because in order to save like $6 a day, I think I did the math, to get like $100,000 would be like 16,000 days of no coffee. You know what I mean? Like, there's just no way. Nobody's going 16,000 days without coffee. Like, it's ridiculous. So because of that, people are like, well, why try and do the thing? Let me just resort to this thing. And weirdly, with this whole like concept of ownership, I think is so fascinating. Like, one of the first things that really stemmed this video idea in my mind randomly was Sony Angels and this obsession with collectible toys, and how people, when they can't afford to buy a home or save up from this greater sense of ownership, are getting satisfaction from owning this collection of these tiny little things, right? Like, in a month of saving, you might not be able to make a dent in what a down payment would be, but in a month of saving, you can make a dent in buying one Sony Angel mystery box every week until you collect them all. And it's so interesting. Again, like, weird cause and effect relationship. It's just a random thing that I think about. Like, people have really had this propensity towards feeling more ownership over tiny little things because we can't have ownerships over houses and cars anymore. I mean, I even would say that the way that DIY has really taken off, and see all these people with these like beautiful aesthetic apartments where they're spending so much money on like this vintage furniture and everything to make it beautiful. Like, the reason people are doing that is because it's like, well, I can't afford a house and I'm not going to be able to afford a house for the next 10 years. So might as well make this thing that I have more beautiful. But then what's fascinating again about this paradox of escapism is it's like, I agree with that sentiment, but then also objectively, like, you are putting yourself further away from being able to afford that house. You know what I mean? Like, and it's like, I don't blame the person for doing that, especially as somebody who is decorating their apartment currently. But like, again, it's just this fascinating cyclical nature of society that I'm seeing. Another example I think that has really, really stemmed from this is this glamorization of certain lifestyles. A recent one that I found fascinating is Trav Wives, right? Like, romanticizing this idea of how Nara Smith can spend 8 hours making Cheetos from scratch, right? And I don't think we all actually idolize the idea of having to spend 8 hours to make Cheetos. Like, it is a nice thing. We can take 10 minutes, drive to the grocery store, hand them a few dollars, and eat the Cheetos. I think what people idolize is the fact that she even has 8 hours in the day to spend on making food. Right? Like, that is not something that the average typical person even has anymore. This idea of like free time has almost become a status symbol. When the majority of people are living paycheck to paycheck and in credit card debt, like, the idea of like, oh, I want to do this thing that is completely trivial and I could do in a significantly less amount of time, but it's fun to do in 8 hours, is a almost subconscious symbol of like, I already have wealth or money, right? Because you don't need to use that time to amass more of those things or whatever. And I think that is why there has become this romanticization of these types of things and hobbies. But again, the irony of that is that the reason that those things, you think of like trad wives as like almost like this symbol of conservatism, at least in terms of a lifestyle wise, like, it's ironic that the economic policies of conservatism are what contributed to that in the first place. Like, they're selling you on this lifestyle of something that has happened. However, this like very mass corporatization of all things, giving tax cuts to corporate entities and whatnot, is what created this cost of living crisis. So it is this weird paradox again. Another one I really, really fascinatingly think about all the time is wellness. I think like wellness in big air quotes, or just this idea of, a beautifully thin girl on Instagram posting about 75 hard and her sea moss from Erewhon and how she buys bone broth every single morning to drink it, but is then also selling you a course on her fitness and is doing a brand deal for aloe yoga and right? Like it is this existential, like, I need you to aspire to this lifestyle that I have because I have all this time and all this wealth to do these things already. But again, I think weirdly that's why people are drawn to it, right? Like I wish that I could spend $30 on a jar of sea moss just because I want to make my skin look 0.02% better by putting that in my smoothie or whatever. Or also just this, I think the interesting thing about this sort of like type of culture, diet culture in general, is like they love to sell you on the idea of one thing being a solution to a lifestyle problem, right? Like nobody can look whatever certain way of like the body type you want by simply having sea moss or by simply having bone broth or by simply doing 75 hard, right? It's years, months of working out 5 to 6 days a week. It is years, months of learning how to cook, meal prepping, having a lively house style, developing discipline to say no to certain sweet treats or drinking all the time, whatever, right? But they say, oh my God, this sea moss has done so much for me. Oh my God, this bone broth. Oh my God, this one specific workout routine, because it is monetizable to sell you one thing, right? They can't make this overarching package of all things. They have to sell you all these things individually. So that is where this weird obsession of like, this one thing will solve my problem, and then that one thing doesn't solve your problem, so you have to turn to escapism again and buy the next thing, instead of looking at this overarching thing of like, okay, am I creating a lifestyle? Am I creating a consistent network of my actions that can support me obtaining this result? Most of the time, the answer is no. And when you fix that, you will obtain that result. It's not because of fucking bone broth. You know what I mean? But there's no money in that. There is money in selling you bone broth, which is so weird. And there's this quote I love from Emmeline Klein on Deadweight that said, scrolling through a sea of white smiles and colorful produce, long tan limbs in motion, links to purchase, I see beauty standards masquerading as a health standards, aesthetics dressed up as morals, and money seeping out of Instagram squares. And I love this quote, specifically this idea of like beauty standards masquerading as health standards, right? Like a healthy lifestyle is one, not only related to fitness, right? A healthy lifestyle involves romantic relationships, interpersonal relationships, a consistent job, home that you enjoy, right? Like that is what health is, if we really want to talk about this concept of wellness. But somehow that has become synonymous with looking like me, being this perfectly thin, beautiful woman who does Pilates and is eating sea moss and drinking bone broth and all these weird fad diet things, right? They're so bizarre. And that, again, talking about this like weird cyclical nature of escapism, I think wellness is one of the ones where I see it the most, and really so aggressively targeted towards women. I think is super interesting. Like this is really one of the, I think the biggest example of how this has happened with women. And then a big example where I've seen this behavior happen with men is sports, specifically sports gambling. And if you are with mostly female friends or gay friends, you have likely not seen the epidemic of sports gambling infiltrate your circle yet. But this was the entire situation that inspired this video. When I was talking earlier about going home to this group of friends that I have from my childhood, weirdly, like I'd say the only group of friends I have that is like entirely comprised of like straight males. It's like the only friend group where every single one is a straight male. And they're the people I grew up with in Virginia, and I only go home like once a year, so I really only see them once a year. And keep in mind, I've known these people since I was like 14 years old. And when I went home, throughout this entire over 10 years of knowing each other, never not once have I seen any single one of them play a sport. Any single one of them talk about playing sports. Never have we been to a sporting event together. Never have they talked about wanting to get into it, blah, 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 right? Every single time I went home and hung out with these men, like multiple times, like we were chilling out at the house, we were, at a bar, at dinner, whatever. They had a phone out, a computer out, a TV out, watching a sports game because they were betting on it. They got into sports. They were not a sports fan previously, but because there was now this idea of this instant gratification, right? I can watch this game, and if my bet is right, I win $20. made them interested in the entire concept to begin with, when they previously had zero interest at all, which is so fascinating, right? Like, and again, these are guys who are very good friends with, but it's like 4 dudes who are like, in their 30s and like live in a house together. So they're not like, with peace and love to you, my friends, like thriving economically at the moment, but they have resorted and found so much enjoyment in picking up this hobby that they never gave a fuck about for over 10 years because there is now this added element of escapism into it, right? The game is now interesting to me because I feel excitement now that I could win $20. And then when I win $20, I don't feel bad about going and getting Chipotle for dinner because, I won $20 today, And what's so interesting to me about like these apps like DraftKings and sports games specifically is they're so designed of betting these really, really small dollar amounts, but in mass quantities, right? Like my friends are only, betting $20, $30, $50, but on 6 games a week. And through time, it's hundreds of dollars, sometimes even thousands of dollars, up and down and up and down and up and down. And over time, obviously, the house always wins, right? It's not it cannot be a profitable business if the people betting win more often than not. And there's a reason why the DraftKings is a multi-million-dollar empire, because people lose more often than not. But they don't feel that way because they get these quick hits of dopamine and this escapism, of like, I had this stressful day, but like I got to go home. I saw my team won and I got $50. And then I was like, oh, hell yeah, let me go treat myself to dinner, blah, 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 right? It is perpetuating this wheel of escapism. And it's so fascinating how these addictive behaviors have really, really taken over our culture, whether that's sports betting. I would say phone addiction is insane. I really want to make a video just like on this entire concept of phone addiction, and how I think like 100 years from now, our generation will be studied and observed as like the generation that was so addicted to the phone in a way that's like so not healthy for us. But again, even talking about these things of like flume bars versus cigarettes, cigarettes were so popular. Then there was this massive, massive government effort, government spending to stop behaviors of cigarettes because it's so bad for the population, so bad for the world, so bad for the workforce. So then cigarettes in America, very, very large dip, especially when you compare them to places like Europe now, who didn't have these efforts. But now it's spiking back up with like flume bars and geek bars and jewels, like all of these things, how when you can't beat the escapism reinvents itself as a new product, and then they sell you on that product and convince you that it's not as bad as the first thing, when in actuality, it was just the same thing all along. And that is this really interesting, terrifying element. But again, this is why I see this thing happening in fashion too, for example, right? This Temu core, cowgirl coaster, or mob wife, blah, blah, blah. There's a new trend every 10 seconds because if they want to sell you something every single week, they have to reinvent something. Cowgirl coastal is just Western wear, which has existed for like 200 years, right? It's not a new thing, but they redo the packaging to make you feel like you are missing out on this cultural moment if you don't engage with this thing in this way. And that is why, once upon a time, that was mall culture. That was Victoria's Secret. That was Abercrombie and Hollister. Like those were the brands doing that. But now it has been perpetuated by the internet. And because, again, we now have quicker instant gratification than we ever have before, you can get something shipped to your house in 2 days. And now that thing is $10, when you're talking about like a pair of pants from Temu. And again, what's fascinating to me about this is like, people will spend $10 on a garbage pair of pants from Temu that then breaks after 5 nights out at the club, when then they have to spend a new $10 to get a new thing, whatever. And like this keeps perpetuating, when it's like you could have just maybe spent $100 on a really nice, high quality basic that you've thought a lot about and know that you can wear with multiple pieces of clothing. And if you were to do the math of like cost per usage or whatever, right? Like this is $100 pair of pants, but it's so high quality, you can wear it 100 times or more, makes the cost per use $1, right? But if you buy this $10 pair of pants that are absolute trash and you can only wear them out 5 times, then you only get $2 per usage. So the Temu $10 pair of pants in the long run is costing you double the amount that the actual high quality, good, solid thing will cost you. But the one thing has less instant gratification. And that is why people are drawn to this idea of fast fashion, drawn to this idea of sports gambling, drawn to this idea of nicotine addiction or 75 hard or bone broth, whatever. Like it is that, again, we don't have the time. We don't have the free time and disposable income are now a status symbol in this rapidly declining economic system, as we're seeing when cost of living is so high. Even another interesting one I thought about recently was, when the definition of escapism talked a lot about fantasy, it got me thinking about how some of the most popular franchises lately have been things like Game of Thrones or Wednesday Addams, Stranger Things, even things like, Book Talk, how like Colleen Hoover books, these very like whimsical, happy, but also like romanticizing these things that aren't so good. A lot of elements of love are also just like a very easy, almost, simplified elementary style of read are becoming the most popular book franchise. And it's because I think it's fiction. So it's this element of escapism. That's that fantasy element. And then two, they integrate this element of like romanticizing these things of the world that aren't good in a daily basis. So when we see this character in that bad situation, it makes us feel like the bad situation in our real life isn't actually that bad, instead of looking at that bad situation and being like, how can I get out of it? Which is a really, really interesting thing. Again, another one that I think is this interesting element of escapism is talking about, we hear so many people talking about this loneliness epidemic and how hard it is to date and how awful it is, yet things like dating apps are used by everybody and usage at an all-time high. Or I would even argue, you can say this about like OnlyFans, like everybody complains about being lonely and not having anybody, but then there's like millions of dollars a year spent on OnlyFans, right? And it's because that lonely guy, instead of looking at himself and being like, okay, how do I improve myself? How do I work out a little bit more? How do I pursue a more meaningful career? How do I work on my interpersonal skills and even just befriending women, whatever? That is so much harder to do than spending $5 on somebody's OnlyFans and him taking care of it in his bedroom by himself. So they turn to the quick instant gratification, but then that means that they are back to square one tomorrow. They have not fixed this overriding issue of their inability to approach women, inability to establish romantic relationships or improve themselves to make themselves a worthy partner. It is this supplement to ease the pain of the problem while ignoring the problem altogether, is this overarching thesis I see in like every single consumer category. Again, even talking about this loneliness epidemic, like how many of my friends who are women, I was literally talking to a group of my girlfriends last night about this, how, as kids, they all like romanticize and wanted to have kids. And now, one, that feels impossible to do right now. It feels so scary. Two, they feel so not ready. Three, they have no idea how they could ever afford it. Literally none. Kids cost hundreds of thousands of dollars, but they still have that like love and desire for a maternal instinct. So they're getting pets. Like that is their escapism from this feeling of like, oh, like, I don't know if I'll be able to start a family. So they're like, I'm not even going to try. I'm just going to get cats or a dog or whatever. And I truly believe that this has infiltrated all things. I think another really interesting thing we see with this psychological behavior as to how it is destroying society is when people feel badly about something themselves. A very quick way to feel better yourself is not even to do something to make yourself feel better, but to do something to make somebody else feel worse than you. And that is why I think we have seen this rapid rise of hatred, of bigotry, of hate comments of online, the way that, again, talking about like in a Death of Nuance episode, the way these toxic fandoms interact with each other, where they feel like a better person if I can explain to you why you're wrong, or you're ugly, or what you said in this video was wrong, or you referenced this thing incorrectly, or you pronounced this name wrong. Like there is no empathy towards this other person because they feel like if I am here and I can establish that you are here, then I now feel better by comparison. Instead of moving themselves up, they have found somebody else to move down. And I think that's interesting that, again, when there's this really great, large economic crisis happening, we also see these elements of like bigotry and, like what Kanye did at the Super Bowl is insane. 5 years ago, that is not even like a thing that would be possible or allowed. Nonetheless, like the fact that to my knowledge, as of right now, Fox has not like banned him from advertising or banned him from their network, or like the fact that that is not even like, that is a tangibly okay thing to do, even as a stunt, even if you view it as a stunt, is so far removed from where our society was. And I think that that is because there are some people out there who feel better about themselves when they can make somebody else feel worse, or at the very least establish, like, on this massive totem pole of life, I am not at the bottom, somebody else is. And the scary thing about that is it doesn't change who's at the top. It doesn't change who's exploiting you, whether that's your job, your boss, the company you work for, the industry, all of these things, right? There's a million, the government, anything. Like, there's so many other moving parts that people will ignore for this feeling of that instant gratification. So with that, how the hell do we stop this escapism? Great question, and not something I know that I can solve on my own. Number one, I think, is always acknowledge the consequences. Acknowledge the consequences and acknowledge the inputs, right? Like, let's say you are somebody who's really lonely and you're looking for a partner. And like, yeah, you know, you can spend the day on Hinge or whatever. You can go out to a bar and get drunk and make out with somebody, or you can do whatever. But at the end of the day, when you wake up tomorrow, you do need to acknowledge that if the reason you aren't finding love or whatever is because of your inability to talk to people, or maybe, let's be honest, sometimes we're not at a stage in our life where we are a suitable partner. Whether we are not have the time, we don't have the money, we don't have the emotional bandwidth, whatever, right? And those are the real systemic problems that you have power over and can change, right? You can improve yourself. You can improve your standing. You can improve your position in some way, improve who you are as a person. Learn more, educate yourself, read, try new hobbies where you can meet new people, whatever, right? But because you went out to the club tonight, you're not going to meet the love of your life. You're going to meet somebody who's drunk and also seeking escapism, and neither of you can fill the void that you feel in each other, right? And you need to acknowledge that consequence. And if you want, there's this quote I love that's like, if you change nothing, nothing changes, right? And you need to acknowledge that if there's something in your life you are not happy about, whether that is your career, friendships, romantic relationships, whatever, you need to change your actions, right? If you want new outputs, you need to put in new inputs. If you want to find a new romantic partner, you need to go new places. You need to try a new hobby where you can run into people. You need to go to bars that you're not going to. You need, like, hang out with friends that you don't, whatever, right? Like, there's a million things you can do, but you can't just sit here and blame the world around you and turmoil in your rage when you are refusing to take a new action to solve that problem in the first place. So acknowledge the consequences, acknowledge the inputs. And then two, I really think focus on community and foster connection with the activity. It's such a real thing, right? Like, again, going back to this example of like working out, I don't know why I'm fixating on this. It's just like an easy thing for me to come up with examples with. If your goal is to work out, the easiest way to do that is, how do I go to a yoga class once a week with my friend? We go every Wednesday at 7 p.m. and I go because I know if I don't go, she's going to be upset. And she goes because she knows if I don't go, or she doesn't go, she knows I'm going to be upset. And we both committed to this thing. We both paid for this thing and we have agreed upon it. And it's nice because I get to go and I get to catch up with this friend. So not only am I overcoming this obstacle in my life, I'm getting to build this deeper connection with this person. We catch up once a week and hold each other accountable, right? You're holding each other accountable to improve in that thing. And I think if you feel like you want to improve in something, that there is also somebody out there in your life who wants to improve on that thing, you know? And if that's your career, you find a friend who also kind of hates their job and you're like, hey, every Sunday for the next month, let's go to this coffee shop from 12 to 2 p.m. and apply to jobs together and just and how commiserate. Talk about how much the job market sucks. Talk about how much you hate doing it. Talk about how much this stupid cover letter is, blah, 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 right? Like, get the feelings out. But get the feelings out with another person face to face to solve this epidemic of loneliness. And then two, get the feelings out while making meaningful progression, right? Like, pair the negative stimulus with a positive stimulus, and you will be progressing. And also, I think the last is just be cognizant of this escapism. Be cognizant of, am I running? Am I running? And if I do this thing that I know will make me feel better, am I actually going to feel better tomorrow? Or am I just going to feel better tonight? You know, and really hold on to that. So that was the Epidemic of Escapism. Please, y'all, don't forget to subscribe to the channel. We're on the road to 100K. I really want to do something fun and exciting. I don't know. I was thinking about should I start a Patreon or Substack or just I don't know. I really enjoy just communicating and talking, and I would love to find a way to feel more intimately connected with us, you know, where it's not just me talking at you, but some sort of format where we can interact, if that makes sense. So yeah, don't forget to subscribe to the channel. Follow us on Spotify, please. Our goal is 10K on Spotify. I love y'all so much, and I'll see you next week. Bye.